So if you've lived in Portsmouth for at least 2 years and are within their income bracket, you can get up to $30,000 in a down payment assistance loan. That is
Really?
at 0%. To have that surplus of money when you're going to buy a house is such an incredible gift. It's this wave of money that you don't actually have to repay until you sell, or 10 years later, it starts to build interest.
Welcome to Seacoast Stories, a podcast about the people, businesses, and newsmakers that make the Seacoast an American hidden gem. I'm Troy Farkas, and on today's episode, the king of Seacoast real estate, Andrew Samonas, on why houses are so expensive, but how you can still find your dream home despite the price tag. Today's story starts in March of 1999. An adorable 3-year-old named Troy has just moved into a new house in Clifton Park, New York, a mostly middle-class suburb sandwiched between Saratoga and Albany. Alongside his older brother and 2 loving parents, he sits on a Teletubbies blanket in the middle of his new living room, the same spot he'll occupy for the next 25 years and counting. The family of 4, in an unfurnished room, eats pizza from Mama's, the neighborhood spot. After spending the past decade bouncing from California to Washington to North Carolina, the nomadic family feels they found their forever home, finally, here on Ponderosa Drive. Every year, on March 8th, my family and I gather, in person or virtually, to commemorate the anniversary of a historic day in our story. Wherever we are, we sit on a blanket on the floor, eat pizza, enjoy each other's company, as we have every year since 1999. A home is more than a place to sleep. It's a place to make memories, to gather, celebrate, work, play, cook, feel safe, laugh, and to love. Besides who you marry, buying a home is the most important decision a person can make. And that's why, as you wade through the long process, you have to be armed with as much information as possible. That's where today's guest, Andrew Samonas, comes in. He's one of the top dogs at Samonas Realty, second in line only to his father, Seacoast real estate veteran John Samonas. Admittedly, I know nothing about real estate, mostly because I've never settled long enough to buy a house, but also because 6-figure price tags and 30-year mortgages scare the heck out of someone who has commitment issues. But after this conversation with Andrew, I feel way more informed about how real estate works, and hopefully you will too. In this conversation, Andrew and I will discuss a couple items: why Seacoast real estate is so expensive, what you can do to buy a home anyway, the up-and-coming towns worth looking into, and even a debate about the Hearth Market and other Portsmouth businesses. But before we get to that, we begin by learning more about Andrew's story, how he got into the industry, what it takes to succeed in real estate, and more. Take it away, Andrew.
Yeah, I am a fortunate baby of nepotism. I know that can get a certain connotation out there, and I'm ready for all the feedback and criticism for that. But my dad started the business in 1985 out of Hampton Beach. He grew up there, and then he moved this way, and I grew up in Greenland. Working with my dad has been the most comical and enlightening experience, I would say. The guy hates using computers and will toss a pile of papers on my desk and say, figure it out. I can tell you that today alone, I think he's called me 6 times, which is below average. But we are not only business partners, but also sort of feeding off of each other in a mentorship type of way, where he's got this deal experience and years of experience just in this industry alone. I kind of bring sort of like this new light of how does brokerage run? How does the real estate industry run? Certainly with so many new technologies and access points into real estate, we certainly need to be on the forefront of all of those. And this landscape is very, very tough. You can certainly drown in it overnight, but it's also an opportunity to really build a reputation around town. And so I'm fortunate that he has a solid reputation. And now I'm able to come in and create my own identity and hopefully establish a little bit of a following and a strong rapport with other local professionals.
Was this profession, growing up in it, something that you were raised to do, or was your dad trying to push you in this path, or were you trying to do something else?
Real estate inherently is a personality fit. And so I grew up riding around in the car with my dad, hearing his conversations and watching him do business. And at the time, you may not resonate with it, but it builds in your subconscious. And then I really wanted to get licensed and test it out during my senior year of college. It was just one of my goals. And doing that, I sat through a real estate course to get licensed. And I was like, I think I might know a lot of this already. And so to have this built in and almost intrinsic to my personality or my working operation was really cool to figure out. And then the second half of it, and something that he and I agreed upon pretty early, was that I should go out and learn from somebody else as well. You certainly don't want a unilateral vision of what real estate is. And so that was the goal. And so from there, I went out and worked for a couple of different developers and wanted to make sure that I could grasp what real estate really was beyond just my dad's voice in my head.
You said that real estate is a personality-based business.
Oh, yes.
What would you say are the traits that someone must have to be successful in this business?
You could certainly define success as a lot of different things. And so for me, one of my successful traits, so to speak, would be just be insatiably curious about what goes on around town, how to improve yourself and how to improve the way you approach the business. So whether you're approaching home buyers, home sellers, whether you're approaching investments. And then another really important trait is intrapersonal relationships. So when you walk to the coffee shop, it pays to be an extrovert, right? You can strike up a conversation with somebody that's visiting town from Connecticut or Pennsylvania, and they're here for all of 48 hours, but you want to make sure that they get the best 48-hour experience when they come to Portsmouth, because that's your landscape and that's where you are making money. And so the intrapersonal relationships, both at a client level, but also working amongst other real estate agents, is something that is a must. And I would say that that's intrinsic to success within this industry.
You've mentioned relationships a lot, and this is something that I think we should talk about because it applies not only to this business, but really to all businesses that involve communicating with others. The difference, in my opinion, between a person who's good at building relationships and bad at building relationships is the ability to make it seem as if you truly care about that other person and that you're just not in it for ulterior motives. So when you are going about building relationships along the Seacoast, how do you make sure that it's from a genuine place and not from just, oh, I want this person to be a client one day?
It's such a valid question, honestly. And I chuckle because if I get introduced to somebody new through a friend or a colleague or past client of mine, and they say what I do for work, obviously the first question is, well, we're not in the market. We're not in the market to buy or sell. I'm like, that's fine. You know, there is this inherent idea of just, we always need to be selling. And that's fine because that's sort of what society is doing right now. You're always being marketed to, you're always trying to be sold something, right? And so for real estate, specifically in Portsmouth, where we're in a small community, I think I've made a lot of great relationships and eventual clients out of people that we just started up a conversation about X, Y, and Z. And then it took the turn towards real estate and getting to know somebody organically first, and secondarily on a topic that may not have anything to do with real estate, but then they hear your authenticity and they hear what you're all about. And then you can lead into a conversation. But working with buyers and sellers, it's more than critical. And it's the only way to succeed is by building trust. You're talking about probably one of the largest financial undertakings that a general American would get into, right? So depending on if they are buying, they have to understand not only their own finances, but also their own position within life, right? And you and I discussed previously how certain people could be in the market at such different times in their lives. And that's an emotional undertaking to begin with. So where I stand, I need to be this neutral sort of litmus test for you and say, everything you're describing and your priorities in life sound wonderful, but is buying really the right thing for you right now? And being able to have that very frank conversation with people earns you the trust, right? And it's a privilege to be able to sell or buy in Portsmouth or anything for that matter. And so having the trust of that client is far and away the most important thing before you even start talking about dollars and cents.
Let's talk about Portsmouth in the last 5 years. Now, I know many people in the area who are trying to buy homes, and I don't have any hardcore data, just these anecdotes from these conversations. And everyone seems to say that they're getting priced out. These are younger couples and younger individuals getting priced out by people from New York City, from Boston, who during COVID fled the big cities because why pay to live in a big city if the big city's not open? This happened across the country. People realizing that, you know what, I can live a good life and have fewer, especially if I'm working from home, and just cut out a lot of the inefficiencies of living in a big city and also the big costs. So people have moved to the Seacoast as one of these attractive options. In the last 5 years, have you seen from your business that is the case, that we have seen an uptick in people coming from these big cities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will try my best to assuage the concern with that. I think that there is a huge benefit to having folks like that come to the area. Now, I will entirely pause here and say, I love the local Portsmouth community. I love the people that have been here for 40, 50, 60 years, and they are everything that Portsmouth stands for. They created a lot of the communities that we have here. Now, with that said, when other folks from across the country move to your area, first of all, that's such a pat on the back respect thing, because they say, that's where I want to live. That's where I want to retire. That's where I want to raise my kids. And people that live in Portsmouth now just have to acknowledge that at one point or another, they were those people as well. And unless you were born here, and certainly there are generational families in Portsmouth, but unless you were born here, like sometimes you can be a newcomer to Portsmouth and still have lived here for 20 years, which is such a unique attribute of a community. So yeah, our office is on Bow Street next to Surf Restaurant. And in the summertime and fall, we like to leave the door open. And I cannot tell you how many times people have fallen into our office from Connecticut, Pennsylvania, California, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and said, hey, look, we are expecting to retire in the next 1, 2, or 3 years. And this is kind of what we're thinking we want, whether that be a downtown condo, townhome, small single family with lesser of a yard, or we're downsizing. And they say, we're not in a rush, but this is what we want. And so thus begins that search. And I say, well, why do you want to move here? And they outline a few of these interesting reasons. Number one is we're 1 hour to Boston, we're 1 hour to Portland, Maine, and to benefit both of those things, we have no income tax, we have no sales tax, we have no estate tax. And so people meet with their financial advisors several years before they're set to retire, and their financial advisor, their accountant says, hey, like FYI, here's this opportunity sitting right in front of you, and all you have to do is move 12 miles over the Massachusetts border, or you just have to have your primary residence in New Hampshire instead of Connecticut. And so that's one demographic. Now, Portsmouth attracts, and like you just mentioned, you have a lot of younger people and younger friends in your network that are trying to buy homes. And so that's the opposite end of the spectrum. It's so fun for me to watch folks move out of Boston and start deciding, okay, if we're working from home or we work remote and we get to decide where we live, where is that going to be? And for me, showing off what we offer here in the Seacoast, and it's not just Portsmouth, there are 12 to 15 to 20 different towns and cities that I can name that are all just as exciting as Portsmouth, which is so cool because you have access to all of them here. I love to say that nothing is far. So for these younger folks, usually one of 3 life events happens. They get a dog, they get engaged, or they have a kid. And so when any one of those things happen, it sort of triggers this, okay, what are we doing next? And maybe we want a little more space. Maybe we want access to younger people, and maybe we want access to go skiing and go hiking and running outside. And sometimes the urban cities that we're surrounded by don't quite offer that. So that exercise with younger buyers, namely first-time buyers, is so exciting to me. And it offers me sort of this chance to do this song and dance and say, hey, look, what do you want? What are you prioritizing? What do you value in your living space? And how do we get there? And it's not impossible by any means.
Okay, so how can we make it happen? How can we get them keys to some Seacoast houses?
Sure. So I know you just interviewed NBA player Duncan Robinson, so I'll use the basketball analogy. Okay. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I think when you have such a demographic like you just explained, first of all, I could get a call today right now and saying, hey, I want to go look at this house. I want to buy it. And I'm actually just not going to set up a showing. I think there are so many steps before going to look at your first house and understanding, again, the priorities of what you want, how you're going to get there financially. And then the third one, and the most important one, is timing. A lot of folks could either be in a lease agreement in their apartment, they could be in a month-to-month agreement, or they could be living in their parents' house, which is something that we see more often than not, is a younger couple living at their parents' home to save up money for a down payment, which is the most economically savvy thing that they can do. So when they approach me and say that, I say, okay, how much time do you have? Because being patient and not making hasty decisions will actually unlock and create so much more opportunity for them. And it's so enlightening, I think, when we can have a very frank discussion and they realize that, I'm not looking to get them in the house by tomorrow afternoon, but more so looking to get them into the house that they're going to be happy with 1, 3, 5 years down the road, and allows them to achieve sort of all of those priorities that they're setting out to hit. So when you start looking for a house and there is so much competition and tough headlines out there, I agree. It can be so intimidating and so you can become so apprehensive. But ultimately, having faith that you are going to stick to your parameters and stick to those items that are important to you. Then when you do find that one thing or that one spot and you walk in the front door and you say, yeah, this is it. Okay. Now we need to set out the terms. Now we need to set out the timing. And now we need to understand where you are at financially to not leave you exposed, to not miss out on the opportunity, but also just to get that right spot. And so I tell people when they look at me and they say, yeah, this is it, we take action. And for me, that's where I jump. And that's where I think being a professional, being full-time and being really data oriented allows me to be successful. It's being very frank with everyone and saying, yeah, I agree that this is the spot for you. Now let's go get it. And so by doing that and setting those expectations early, when I say, this is what we need to do, and this is the type of contract that we need to write, or, hey, this is where we need to be in terms of an offer, they have trust and they have belief that I'm not misleading them. I'm not just trying to get them into a house and walk away. It's no, this is what you've explained to me in the past. And now I see that coming to fruition. So let's get on the horse and let's go to town.
So as we were speaking, it is September. In the presidential election run-up, we're hearing a lot about interest rates and what President Trump and Kamala Harris would do. I think it's 5.25 to 5.5 is the rate right now, which is pretty high. And inflation obviously is very high as well. So are these detractors right now for people where just buying a house just isn't really even an option for lots of people that you're dealing with because of the current state of the economy?
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that's not an influence. And I'll be the first to tell you that stuff is expensive. Going to the grocery is kind of scary sometimes. And so, yeah, when you look at housing prices and you look at interest rates and you start to really put pen to paper to understand what do my economics allow me to do? And I know that you and I had this discussion, like, where do you even start to wrangle your down payment? Where do you start to wrangle, what am I really comfortable paying monthly? And so to answer that question, we have to take a step back and realize that real estate agents like myself, we're not setting the prices. Supply and demand are setting the prices like any other economic product or commodity.
And do people realize that?
Oftentimes it can get misconstrued. Okay. And I won't put the pin on one person or one entity necessarily, but I think it's really important to understand, and we're talking about Portsmouth here today. So Portsmouth has this insatiable desirability to it and this attractiveness for either demographic that I just mentioned. So to understand that this demand is never going away, hopefully, cross our fingers, is never going away, is just really important. So if you want to buy in Portsmouth specifically, yeah, you may be paying a premium, but where does that premium get you? And so if you are comfortable with your monthly payment at a certain interest rate, I would suggest that you play with that a little bit and say, how long can I really sustain this? Is this something that I'm just convincing myself is okay? Or am I really truly at my core ready to put my money on the line and invest? Because at the end of the day, a primary residence is still an investment, and building equity and allowing yourself the opportunity to build equity is an investment that you can realize a return on. And so when you buy something, you immediately start counting your return on your investment.
I think you had told me that Portsmouth is impervious to when the economy is really bad or whenever there's crashes, just because Portsmouth has been on the up and up over decades, whereas many other towns and cities around the country have fluctuated based on the economy. But is it correct that Portsmouth has just really been seen steady growth?
Yeah, there are certainly times in its history where it may not have grown. It may have declined at a very marginal rate, or it may have stagnated. One of those examples, I think, for the Portsmouth historians out there and the listeners that I know that you certainly have, is when the Pease Air Force Base closed.
When was this?
1983.
Oh, okay.
And we should do a fact check at the end of the episode. But when that happened, the population of Portsmouth, as well as the working population of Portsmouth, significantly declined. And therefore, there was a significant surplus of properties on the market, namely Panaway Manor, Atlantic Heights, those types of neighborhoods where a lot of those employees and workers frequented. So yes, there are times where in very short order, the Portsmouth values have dipped, but otherwise, very confident I can say that Portsmouth has been on the rise for several years at this point. And we're not talking about 1% to 2%. We're looking at 7% to 12% on average for a general Portsmouth single family home or condo. And to be able to have that as a homeowner or a home buyer walking into a market and saying, why do I want to put my money here? Or why do I want to invest my really sensitive nest egg into this market? Well, because you know that at some capacity, you can almost rely on that. Now, anything in the economy, stocks, bonds, interest rates, and inflation, those go up and down so rapidly. But where Portsmouth sits and where the Seacoast region sits more macro level, we've seen a lot of growth. And whether it's a presidential election, whether it's incredible changes in our macro economy nationally, it's really important to acknowledge that a lot of our property values around here have really sustained. And that's such a fortunate thing to be able to say, because that's not the case elsewhere in the country.
And do you expect in the coming years the word to get out even more about Portsmouth than what the Seacoast has to offer?
I'll give you an anecdote for something that happens when I'm not here. When I travel and I say I'm from New Hampshire, sometimes I get the response, "Oh, what part of Connecticut is that in?"
No way. Americans say this?
Honest.
Oh my God,
honest.
we are so stupid.
And so I'll chuckle and wipe that one off. But the other response I get is, "Oh, I've been to Portsmouth." And to be from the destination that people travel to in your state, I think is inextricably tied to being in real estate and the desirability that we're talking about. So if you walked out the front door of where we're sitting right now, downtown Portsmouth, and looked at what's building around us, then yeah, I feel as though people are really trying to jump into this market because they know what we offer. We have so many different communities within the Portsmouth area or zip code. And again, when I say Portsmouth, I really do mean regionally. Again, it's so important to acknowledge even Kittery, Elliott, Maine, York, Maine, Greenland, Stratham, Newmarket, Epping, Somersworth, Newmarket. Like these are all areas that contribute and Portsmouth benefits from because of the people coming here to spend money or participating in our local community. So yeah, I think people really just acknowledge the desirability of, hey, I can go to Portsmouth or I can go to this area and practice my pottery. I can go and practice being a musician. I can go and be around runners. I can go and be around cyclists and really learn and be in a community of like-minded people, which is so fortunate to be able to say.
So for my friends who perhaps are doomed and cannot afford Portsmouth, what are the up-and-coming Seacoast areas? What are the other towns that they really should be looking into to try to find something more affordable?
Newmarket is phenomenal. I am so bullish on Newmarket for many different reasons. It's got water. It's got a couple different rivers running through it. You've got a 12-minute drive to Portsmouth or to the Mass border. You've got so much green space, and a lot of Newmarket is preserved, fortunately. And you also have these little cutesy coffee shops, and Panzanella's is a great butcher shop and market. Elliott, Maine and Kittery are both simultaneously feeling this insurgence of life. And it has been that way for a long time. And if somebody can stomach the income tax, Kittery and Elliott are both phenomenal places to live. You get that much more space, that you maybe get a bigger backyard. You get walking distance to the Kittery Foreside. You get walking distance to the Piscataqua River. So don't be shy on those types of places. And ultimately, one thing that I go through with first-time home buyers is, I really want to sell you your dream house. But if we are being realistic, what is most important to you? Getting access to this area in this market and home ownership, or buying your dream house on day one? And so for folks to understand that, hey, maybe this isn't where I'm going to spend the next 40 to 50 years is one thing that I think being able to stomach that early on will really help them unlock more capability and more areas to live in.
I adore Kittery, but living there seems so stupid when you just cross the bridge and state income tax. You don't have to pay it.
Yeah.
It just seems like such a silly decision to live in Kittery.
I've been in 3 states today. On day of recording this, I've been in 3 different states. So I definitely get sort of the blended borders and lines. Now, at the same time, it goes back to your priorities. And do you like walking to Lil's Cafe and eating 7 crullers? Yeah, I certainly do. But
must be nice.
If it gets you the opportunity to live this close to Portsmouth and maybe you really value a backyard, then Kittery is your golden goose.
To get back to some of the struggles that buyers are having right now, when people come to you and are looking to buy, what do they flag to you as their biggest concerns when you're having these prospective conversations?
They have a certain nest egg. If you've got a savings of X amount of dollars and you're looking at a down payment that you have to shell out almost all of your nest egg, and you're looking at a certain house or a property that is going to require work and renovation or repair. Now, people get very concerned about how they're going to balance that. Okay, I can buy that property, but can I really afford it? And those are 2 very different questions. And so the recurring maintenance costs or the annual costs of living are things that have to be considered upfront, because those can change how much you can really spend. And doing that exercise early on with whether it's a mortgage lender, your real estate broker, or a family member that has owned houses in the past is really important to grasp early, so that when you do find that house, it does not need to be in perfect shape. Matter of fact, I think there's so much validity to buying a house that needs a little bit of TLC and going through that as a new homeowner. Like, those are the types of educational moments that can transform your experience and cherish
your connection to the home.
Yeah, thank you. So those are aspects that I think go underrated and can really make or break a search.
All it's to say, I can't buy a house anytime soon.
No, there is an opportunity, and that's actually a great injection of statement there. So the city of Portsmouth, and there are many communities that do this. The city of Portsmouth specifically has what's called a hometown buyer program, and the city will offer down payment assistance. I think they just raised it to up to $30,000 now in a 10-year 0% loan. So if you've lived in Portsmouth for at least 2 years and are within their income bracket, you can get up to $30,000 in a down payment assistance loan. That is
really?
At 0%. And so to have that surplus of money when you're going to buy a house is such an incredible gift. It's this wave of money that you don't actually have to repay until you sell, or 10 years later, it starts to build interest.
Okay. So if you've lived in Portsmouth for 2 years and you are in a certain income bracket, they will give you up to $30,000, no strings attached.
Yeah, it comes in a brown paper bag. Put it on your doorstep. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually approved by the city council.
Okay.
So they review the applications for all these hometown buyer program loans, and it goes through Citizens Bank in town. And yes, there are income limits. There are certain thresholds within your bank accounts that need to happen. But I've now utilized it 3 separate times with 3 separate buyers. And each and every time, the smile on people's faces when they realize that this is out there for them, that this can be a resource, that they don't have to go and knock on their parents' door and say, hey, can I have a little bit more money, is such a cool opportunity for people, especially when they want to remain in Portsmouth. You know, one of the examples was with a local school teacher, and it's nearly her dream job, I would say, to speak for her, to be able to teach in Portsmouth and live in Portsmouth. And so if she can now utilize this down payment assistance and remain in Portsmouth as a new homeowner, well, who's going to say no to that? To unlock that ability as you and your friends or people in our demographic begin this search, to be aware of those resources out there and jump on them, because if you're not using them, then somebody else is. And I think there's so much opportunity to incorporate that into someone's finances.
And why do they offer this?
Because Portsmouth, and this is a state of New Hampshire thing as well. So New Hampshire Housing offers a very similar program. So it's not just Portsmouth specific, but people want younger folks to stay in the state of New Hampshire. It's really important to the vitality of New Hampshire's economics to have great talent, a great workforce, a consistent workforce, and also a familiar workforce. So if we can keep people like you and I in the state of New Hampshire because of housing and because we're unlocking this ability, then now we're building a community again and again. Whereas we would otherwise lose those folks to Maine, to Vermont, to Massachusetts, where Boston offers a certain caliber of job. But if we, as a state of New Hampshire, can attract those jobs or those employees to this state and keep them here, well, now we're building a younger population. We're building a more stable population beyond what is otherwise aging and as a higher median age. So that's why. And I'm very passionate about that. And hopefully this idea of a hometown buyer program and down payment assistance becomes more prevalent at the state level, which they have ongoing policies about. Because this idea of live, work, and play in the state of New Hampshire is so true and so accessible once you get here.
Well, that's very exciting to hear. Now, the long-standing piece of wise investment advice in this country has been buy a house, hold on to it for a while, let it appreciate in value and sell it, and you've just made an incredible investment. This wasn't really challenged for decades. Really, in the past 5 to 10 years, I feel like there has started to be a pushback against this timeless piece of wisdom. You have more people being on the side of advocating for renting, and that buying, even if you can afford it, might just not make sense. Can you play devil's advocate for me and explain why renting is a more attractive option than buying for people?
Oh my gosh, can I ever? We just spent the better part of an hour talking about why buying a house is so excellent and exciting and fulfilling, when in reality, I can confidently say as a male in this country, I don't know how to fix my hot water heater. So if my if my hot water heater breaks, if my furnace doesn't kick on and I don't have any heat, I am not going down there to turn wrenches. I need to call somebody. I need to spend money and I need to fix that. When in reality, if you're renting and that happens, well, you're just calling the property manager. You're calling whomever owns that building and saying, hey, FYI, my toilet's broken again. Well, great. Second to that, beyond just the maintenance of home ownership, is you have to understand if it's this thing that's going to be most practical for your lifestyle. Now, you and I talked about how you've bounced around to a few different cities and you said you're kind of a nomad and maybe you don't currently have ideals of owning a home, but I find that to be really exciting for most people, right? And honestly, if you're not certain that a particular demographic or a certain geographic area is not for you, then why are you expending all this money and energy to buy something there? So if you can live in an apartment building like we're sitting in downtown Portsmouth and have amenities like a gym, co-working space, younger people to run into and bump into and have conversations with, well, that's the try before you buy method. And very seldom would I say to somebody, yeah, you should definitely buy if you're new to this area. I think there are so many more steps to get through before you get to that one triggering moment. And so renting just makes the most sense. If maybe your family or maybe your job status pulls you in different directions, or maybe you just really value traveling. There's this huge wave of micro living and living in little tiny apartments, being a minimalist, but having the most opportunity to jump on experiences and spend your money on experiences rather than a house. I know that I value that to a very high degree, and I will never get rid of that notion. So if someone approached me and said, hey, I want to buy a house, but this is all the money I have and I won't be able to travel anymore, well, that's a pretty big shift in your reality that you have to come to terms with. So before we get to that point, it's, well, what else do you have on your plate? And what else is out there that is really drawing your attention? Because to be able to pick up and move at the end of a lease is a beautiful thing sometimes. And owning a house doesn't make you cooler. I think that there are a lot of societal norms or societal paths that people are pressured into taking, and owning a house is obviously on that list. So It's such an exciting moment to be able to say, yes, I own my house. Yes, I invested my time, energy, and money to be able to not only preemptively plan for this, but also plan my life around this now that I own it. But ultimately, there are a lot of different priorities for people.
Coming up, Andrew and I disagree about Hearth Market. Plus, how Portsmouth's love for local coffee drove Starbucks out of town. Stay with us. This is Seacoast Stories. Hey everyone, it's Troy. Let me throw out a scenario to you. You have friends visiting from out of town, and you want to make sure you give them the best possible Seacoast experience. So you do all the things, right? You drive along Ocean Boulevard, chill on Venice Beach, grab a coffee at Sandpiper, or maybe you walk across my favorite bridge, grab a drink at the Buoy Shack, maybe go for a tiny hike in Portsmouth's nature preserve. But of course, to cap off the evening, you take your friends out for a nice dinner. And if you feel smothered by all of our wonderful options, you go to Yelp so the reviewers can give you a clear choice. Think about it. How many restaurant decisions have you made based on a Yelp review? For me, hundreds. And unless you're a serial killer, of course you wouldn't take your friends to a restaurant with only 4 reviews. Well, the same goes for podcasting. The more reviews a show has, the more likely people are to give it a listen. So to support this show, I need all of you to do me one favor after listening to this episode. Leave Seacoast Stories a review on Apple Podcasts. Just scroll to the bottom of the podcast feed and click the Write a Review button. Or if you're on Spotify, just click the star in the upper left portion of the feed to submit a rating. It may not seem like much, but those small gestures go a very long way toward making Seacoast Stories the top podcast in the area. Thank you so much for doing that and for being here today. I really appreciate it. Now back to today's story. We've spoken mostly about residential real estate here, but another huge part of your business is commercial real estate.
Yeah.
And there's an ongoing, raging debate in Portsmouth about architecture of the city. I can remember the headlines in the papers a few years ago when this Hearth Market went up, and just how much of a, I don't want to say eyesore, but how different it is in comparison to the rest of Portsmouth. It's a very modern building. The colors are a bit strange in comparison to everything around it. Many people who were here for a while thought this doesn't fit. This looks weird. And there's other properties as well being built around town that don't really mesh with the New England colonial vibe. So I'm just wondering where you fall on this debate of, should we build everything to try to fit the overall vibe of colonial Portsmouth, or should we be building stuff that does look new and modern? Where do you fall on this?
Yeah, I have 3 different lenses there. I have a degree that is called urban design. So how you match a historic landscape with newer developments. So it's generally called urban infill. I also have the lens of being a local and having grown up here. And then I also have the lens of being a planning board member in the city of Portsmouth. Those lenses offer such different approaches to that exact question. Now, the city of Portsmouth is now 401 years old. Let that number sink in for a little bit, right? So through the 400 years of existence, there have been so many iterations of architecture, design, and buildings in this city. We commonly know it as a colonial town and a colonial coastal settlement with brick and great clapboards and such distinct palette of colors, like these pastels that we see around Strawberry Bank. And then you see a building like the Hearth come in, and it sort of is a head scratcher. I'll agree with you there. But it's also this transition, and it still has brick. It still has an interaction with the buildings next to it. And quite frankly, I know that you're newer to town, but anybody that has been here for 5+ years knows that that used to be a parking lot. A parking lot, in my opinion, doesn't really offer too much to the local community. You know, there are certain parking lots that may host farmers markets or little festivals, sure. But a parking lot in the middle of a downtown Portsmouth doesn't really contribute. So I think the Hearth Market is such a beautiful concept inside. It's a great meeting space. It's a great gathering space. I've met people there for coffee. I've had great business meetings there. I've sat there on a Friday evening and listened to somebody play live music, which I think is this unlocking ability to get out and share in the public space. So the way that Hearth building and that type of development interacts with the existing landscape of Portsmouth is more relevant to me than maybe the way it came out or the way it looks. Now, one thing that you said is that it's got this brass on it. It's got this green tonality. That will actually change over time. So brass weathers at a really interesting scale. And so as we have this conversation, as people have their opinions on it, just keep watching it and keep watching as it evolves, right? And keep watching as the people inside of that building evolve, because that's probably my most significant takeaway is, how are people interacting or enjoying this space?
I don't know if you can comment on it, so I will say this, and I will speak for the people. I don't like this building. The outside, I don't mind. It's the inside. I don't think they know what they want to be. Every time I walk in that building, which is once a week, it's different. I liked the original concept of it a lot, of having, here's the pizza, here's the coffee shop, here's the bakery, here's the bar, here's all this common area that people can come hang. It feels like they're driving out intentionally the casual sitter. And I feel unwelcome there. I feel like if I'm not sitting down for a meal there, I feel like they don't want me there. And I don't like that.
When you just first started speaking, I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to have to cut this. But I think it provides a really good opportunity to give some insights. Hearth is this wide open space with very little definition on the inside. You have a certain finite amount of square footage, but you can do with that concept, whatever succeeds. So you've had a couple of different jobs in the last 3 years and you've pivoted, you've changed paths, and currently you're sitting in front of me in Portsmouth, but you may pivot and end up somewhere else. The same applies for a business in Portsmouth or anywhere else for that matter, right? So Hearth started out as this food hall with a variety of different concepts. And then they tested that theory. They tested it out both in the winter and spring and summer now. What's really important to note is that they have to allow themselves this economic ability to succeed too. So putting more emphasis on the coffee versus the sit-down food, putting more emphasis on the alcoholic beverages versus the sandwich station. Now, what people have to recognize is that all takes time to unfold. And a business concept, again, whether it's in Portsmouth or anywhere else, is expensive. And they can't keep running at a certain margin or deficit or profit and expect the same result, right? There are so many different injections of not only opinions, but also relevant needs or demands from a restaurant like that. So yeah, we've never had a food hall necessarily of that kind in Portsmouth, at least in my recent memory. But I think it's this new offering that with the right tweaking could become something really effective and really successful. I may be a painful optimist in that fact, but you said, you don't feel as welcome. Well, as unfortunate as that may be, they still have to make money. So if you go in there and sit and only buy one cup of coffee for $3.50 and you spend 3 hours there and use their Wi-Fi and their bathrooms and services.
I'll get a baked good too if I'm there for 3 hours.
I'm a sucker for a good baked good. So they have to recognize where those profits and losses come from, meaning, are people just sitting here to use our Wi-Fi, or are they really spending money? What's our average ticket? How are we going to utilize this space and make money and generate a revenue from it? So at the end of the day, yeah, I can certainly see where your experience has led you to believe that. But from the business owner in me, I do see that there is this demand for change that they just haven't put their thumb on yet. And I know that they're actively working through it. I go in there all the time and I see the changes and it confuses me, but then I have to come back to square one and say, look, if this were my building, how would I want this space to utilize? How would I want people to interact with it?
Yeah. Well, I'm unempathetic because I haven't owned a business, but maybe one day when I will understand what they were going for. I've lived here for just over a year and I myself have seen lots of turnover. For example, the district kitchen, I live near where it used to be. It's now Litherman's Brewing, both great spots. Starbucks just went out of business in town as well. There is lots of business turnover in this town. What do you attribute that to?
It's really tough to make it in Portsmouth, man. And we are, again, privileged in so many different ways, for the reason being that in the summer months where we are now, our weekend population can swell. We sit at a permanent population of about 22,000. And on the weekends, it's proven that our population can swell to 60 to 100,000 people.
That is crazy.
And that's a real data point. 60 is conservative. 100 has been hit before and happens frequently. So it's hard to make it in Portsmouth, even with those data points, right? I think with the barrier to entry, meaning the cost of doing business in Portsmouth, it's really important to note that even with the best concepts, even with the most fleshed out business model, there are certain things that just don't make it. Now, you mentioned Starbucks is obviously one of the more recent and relevant stories because it's an international brand with a long-standing relationship with Portsmouth in that same space. So 22 years, I think it was, on that corner.
Wow.
Now, with the demand, as we talked about earlier, the demand of retail space in Portsmouth, what happens? Well, Starbucks does their business economic test on that location. And they realize that, well, the rent's going up and the cup of coffee is maybe getting more expensive for them. And also the competition's going up. So in the same time frame that I'm sure Starbucks re-signed their lease some years ago, I'm fairly certain that 3 or 4, maybe 5 coffee shops have opened within shouting distance of the front door of Starbucks. So if you're the decision maker at Starbucks and you look at a space that does not have a drive-through, mind you, and does not have the sustained population of 60 to 100,000 people, well, now you're faced with a really tough call. As a local and as somebody who is friends with a lot of the coffee shop owners, I'm going to sit here and say that I frequent all of them, not just one. I love to be a regular at all of them. And I love to have my frequent flyer card and get the stamps and all that jazz. And there is such an identity to each coffee shop that we have, even Starbucks, right? So Starbucks was a great meeting place, and it was great because they were such phenomenal contributors to our community. But ultimately, they looked at it and said, those Portsmouth people, they're tough, man. And those Portsmouth people are going to stick with their local brew and their local brands. So that's, I think, the big picture influence. And then the more granular answer to your question is, well, it's really expensive to do business in Portsmouth.
Not that I'm ever celebrating anyone going out of business, but I actually think that it's awesome, not for Starbucks, but to hear that we support local so much in our local coffee shop. So
it's what makes Portsmouth so killer.
Exactly, because in my town of Clifton Park, New York, where I'm from, my favorite coffee shop in the world is this adorable shop called Mocha Lisa. It is right next to a Starbucks. The number of times I see that drive-through with a line snaking around the entire building when Mocha Lisa is right next to it, a local place with 2 cars, it breaks my heart to see that. Do the math, people. You can go to Mocha Lisa right there, support a local business owner, be in and out in 30 seconds. And so for local to drive out Starbucks in downtown Portsmouth is very unique in terms of what it says about the town.
It is. And it just doesn't stop at restaurants or retail brands, right? So we have a variety of different art communities within Portsmouth, the Button Factory, 3S Art Space, and PMAC, Portsmouth Performing Arts. And so you look at those types of smaller users or players within a certain market. And it's exciting to see that with good credibility and good reputation, they're as successful as some of the national brands. And our restaurants are, I feel, as one of the core bloodlines of Portsmouth, right? People come to Portsmouth to go out to dinner, to celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, et cetera. Like that to me is more of a pat on the back and nod to our success or identity as a whole than having more national brands around.
What are the biggest headaches of this job?
I have headaches where other people would say, why are you complaining? So if I looked at my phone right now, it's currently on Do Not Disturb. Thank you. Good podcast etiquette. I think I have 20 plus text messages, probably 5 or so missed calls and several emails. So that's not going to stop anytime soon. And that's actually a good thing. So my phone doesn't stop, which is meaning that people are demanding my services, demanding my attention, or demanding my time. And so does that cause headaches at times? Does my family look at me sometimes and say, can't you just like put that away? Or, I'm out with hiking with friends, or it's 9 p.m. on a Friday night and somebody texts me or emails me. I welcome that. It's tolerable right now because I can put up with it. But I do understand how on the outside looking in, that can be kind of confusing. So,
and are you expected to answer that 9 p.m. Friday email?
Oh, my friend, I think you asked me about success earlier, and your responsiveness and your timely nature to get back to people and give them not only just an answer, but at least an informed answer is really important to your success.
That sounds like a difficult lifestyle. Is it worth it?
It's 100% worth it.
Why?
I love what I do. And I joke all the time with my buddies that I've never had a real job. I exist as a self-employed person. I make my own schedule, and I have the opportunity to work as much or as little as I want. And I am certainly not the overworked. Like I take generous vacations every year. I do all of the activities that I want, and I find time to turn it off. Definitely. I think that's one of the most important aspects of my business is being able to step aside and put the phone down, literally and figuratively, to reset. So it's demanding in many ways, but it allows me to pursue a lot of different challenges. And, you talk about a home search or an investment or an ability to be connected to the people and the stakeholders around you. that challenge or that chase, so to speak, is what keeps me coming back. Like the reward at the end of it, sure, it might be money, it might be fulfillment, but it's just that constant chase that you get to do. And I'm privileged to do that in Portsmouth, where people have such an overwhelming desire to be. And to me, that's this never ending, again, insatiable kind of trait that I enjoy about what I do.
Andrew, thank you so much for your time and your insight. This has been a great conversation. Hopefully, lots of people in the area have learned something. I don't normally do this, but as you all can tell, I'm out of my league in this conversation. So, Andrew, I'll turn it to you. Is there anything that we have not covered on today's podcast that we should have covered?
No, only one criticism for you.
Oh, great.
I listened to your Stoneface episode and you had said that you didn't know what the old man on the mountain was.
Yeah.
Now that's one thing that I don't think you should ever admit again.
Okay.
And now that it's in the public realm, there is a level of Portsmouth history, or excuse me, New Hampshire history that is super important. Old man on the mountain might be the top of that list.
Okay.
It's on your license plate. It's almost as recognizable as the state motto, live free or die. So no, I think we covered everything. Your question and your prompts are so well crafted, and a lot of people, I hope more than anything that people found this intriguing. Real estate to me is this nerdy passion that I really enjoy, but I also enjoy when other people approach me and say, I have no idea, like you kind of did. And that's okay. Like there is so much to it, but it can also be so simple. And having the goal of whether it's buying a house, a condo, a townhome, or investing your money or renting even an apartment, right? I talk to a lot of people that just got their first job in Portsmouth that they want to rent their first place on their own. And that's just as exciting as buying a house. Yeah. Honest. So nothing that we didn't talk about, but it's just this simplicity that can come with it and being okay with what you don't know, which is something that I've had to become very comfortable with because, I might be good at one thing, but I'm just as bad as a million things. So there's just this vulnerability and willingness to learn that you got to bring to the table. And I think this podcast, as well as a lot of people that I get to interact with, allow me to benefit from. So that's hopefully what people will take away.
Well, as a listener of this show, you know that we have a closing tradition on this podcast. We ask the same final question to the guest at the end of every episode. So I will ask that question to you. Andrew, what is your mission?
My mission is to build stability not only for myself through a career, but also build stability in either one person's, one family's, or a variety of families' life. And whether it be home ownership, a place to live, a roof over their head, or a vibrant community that we call home in Portsmouth. My mission, I think, is really to plant a flag and say that I've had an influence on at least one of those things. And participating in our community, participating in where somebody does call home, it never ceases to be fulfilling in my head. And more than money, more than recognition, and more than my name on my sign and my company, it's something that will keep me going perpetually. So allowing others to find that stability through whatever it is they're chasing is something that is endlessly fulfilling to me.
That's Andrew Samonas of Samonas Realty right here in Portsmouth. Their office is on Bow Street, right next to Surf, so feel free to pop in and ask them any questions. Otherwise, you can visit samonasgroup.com for more information, the link to which is in today's show notes. So before Andrew left my home studio for the day, I wanted to ask him about his foray into the hospitality world. This time last year, he and his father opened up a luxury hotel on Court Street, the Davenport. We didn't get to it during the course of our conversation, but I saved it for today's final question because I just had to know more about how this came to be.
It was a baby born out of working with my dad. And this was an interesting case study on my dad and I's relationship where we had showed that building as brokers to some clients of ours. And while we were in there, he kind of nudged me and said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, I think we should buy this. And I walked out of the building and I said, "Dad, hell no. I don't know what we would do with that." So then a couple of days later, we went back and we walked through the building. He said, "This is my vision." And on the back of a napkin, we drew out how this could become an inn. And so 2 weeks later, after that hell no statement from me, we bought the building.
Dad always wins.
Yeah. I think that was maybe a 10-year issue. And the day that we bought the building, we spent a long time in there diagramming and illustrating where we could create these hotel suites. And we knew that we wanted to capture this luxury appeal and be, as our thesis put it on the back of a napkin, mind you, be the nicest hotel room in Portsmouth. So we set out to create this really timeless product where the building was built in 1758 and it was then moved in the mid 1940s across town because it was set to be demolished. And so we had such a unique position within not only the downtown landscape, but also the hospitality landscape that we could create this really prominent and premier luxury suite for people coming to Portsmouth and experience Portsmouth as it sits as a 400-year-old city. I'm now happy to report a year in that I feel is worth it. And we've gotten such great feedback, and people that have stayed there and walked through it have really given us a lot of enthusiasm to stick it through it.
Big thank you to Andrew for joining me, and a huge shout out to all of you for being here today. I really appreciate the love and support you've all been showing me and the show, and the good news is we're only getting started. So if you see me around town this week, you know the deal. Please stop me and say hi. I would love to hear your story. Until next week, everybody, live free or die.